Hello, everyone. Welcome to the session, Building Unique Cities. We are here today, both audience present in Doha, but also a number of people who joined us from different parts of the world. So a particular welcome to you, especially if you have not attended the previous days of ISOCARP Congress. Welcome to Doha virtually. We are here today, speakers from 5 different countries, to touch upon the topic of building unique cities. We are here standing in the middle of Meshreb downtown. This is in the very heart, central heart, and historical heart of the city of Doha, a project that has created a unique architectural language and design built on traditional patterns, but also on modern aspirations. Very symbolic of what we want to discuss today. So why and how do we want to build a unique and local context-tailored urban fabric, rather than uniform concrete jungles that we see across the global south? This discussion is part of our ongoing program, A Third Way of Building Asian Cities, headed by UNICITI. It is supported by 16 experts across 7 different countries and over 80 young professionals across over 30 countries. And all of us do intense research to identify breakthrough solutions on how do we build unique, sustainable, thriving and local context tailored today, when in the global south there are tremendous needs for new construction, for new housing, and these needs are pressing and we need to react fast. How do we reconcile affordable and rapid construction with unique character of cities and sustainability? So the way the session will unfold, we have 2 speakers here in Doha and 4 teams which will present from different parts of the world. So we will be mixing virtual and presentations here. And I will start with setting the scene, and then different experts will delve into specific topics of what kind of alternative materials we can use at scale to build, what kind of alternative urban design and urban planning patterns we can put in place, and what kind of economic and financial models can support this setup. I would like to start with the presentation, if I could please have the slides. Okay, thank you very much. So I may be moving a bit because it's difficult to just stand here. Am I audible? Online and in person? Okay, great. So building unique cities in the global south, why and how? When we look at this map, we see that most urban growth is actually happening in the global south, and very particularly in Asia and in Africa. Now, 70% of urban poor still live in cities at the moment. So they need to get better conditions. And this is why, partly, 60% of the infrastructure we'll see by 2030 is yet to be built. So there is a tremendous construction boom. And now, how we actually manage this boom, how we build today is a huge responsibility, because what we are going to set in place today is going to stay for decades. Now, in addition to this, another challenge that we are facing is the climate change challenge. When we look at the climate change vulnerability index here, so again, the same issue, it is the global south that is going to be mostly affected by upcoming climate challenges and already existing climate challenges. So how do we deal with them today? Why building unique? Why in this context of rapid construction and rapidly increasing climate challenge, we need to build unique? Overall, let's just take the scene of how things are going. And today, mostly what we are seeing is commercially mass-produced buildings with mass-produced building materials that look pretty much the same all over the world. Actually, those of you looking at the screen, can you tell me which city this is? Just tell anything. Yeah, so people don't know, which is very normal. So this is Sao Paulo, but we can give it another try. Which city is this? Okay. So again, no guess. This is Korea. Okay, Korea, but it's not. But that's a good try. Any other guess? So this is the city of Bangkok. And finally, one more. What about this one? Anyone has an idea? Looks like a miracle city. Johannesburg, yes. So we got one right. This is Johannesburg. But basically, this small, question shows you that we don't know yet. We don't know anymore which cities we are living in. This is where we stand today. Consequences of doing this, actually, we may think it's just we are losing aesthetic appeal. Okay, maybe it's not so bad. But actually, the consequences go far beyond that. First of all, by building uniform, we are not addressing the climate adaptation challenge. Just a quick example, the city of Jakarta, I think most of you know that the city is sinking now, and in fact, the capital of Indonesia is now getting built elsewhere. Why did this happen? So this city is on the monsoon belt, meaning that there are heavy rains every year. Despite of that, 97% of the city is covered by concrete. In addition, high-rises, closed high-rises come in a place where there is no water supply, and therefore groundwater is pumped. So there is now subsidence of land, water floods the city every day, and the city being coastal is just sinking everywhere. So consequences are tremendous. Coming to climate mitigation, so we all know that the COP26 is going on right now. We are discussing how to meet the less than 2 degrees Celsius rise or even 1.5 objective. So now looking at our topic of construction, often when we talk about reducing carbon in the construction sector, in the building sector, we are here, meaning that we look into how much energy the building consumes. But what we forget is that there is this entire cycle of a building life, starting from extracting raw materials to prepare construction materials, transporting them to a manufacturing place, making the materials, bringing them to the construction site, so then the building life, right? And then we also need to dispose of the building once the building is no longer fit to be utilized. So all of this is called embodied energy. And only this part of manufacturing construction materials, conventional ones. So we have cement, glass, aluminium, steel. Only that represents 10%, 1/10 of our global emissions. So unless we actually heavily tackle the issue of how we build, we are not meeting our climate objectives. And then finally, building uniform affects physical and mental health. So when we live in these unhealthy cities, many studies have shown that not only it affects you physically, but it tremendously affects you mentally. And finally, all of this leads to the fact that cities are becoming uncompetitive when they build in this manner. Because in the industrial era, you actually needed to be at your job place to earn money. This is no longer the case now, especially for the qualified workforce. So now you can sit at your home, wherever is a nice place, and you work with someone living in another part of the world. So unless cities provide this quality of life, in the decades to come, they're going to absolutely lose competitiveness. There is another way which we see in which we build today, which we can call a niche way of building, which looks like this. This is, for example, the city of Xartafilelt in Algeria, built by a community with only local sourced materials in a sustainable way and in an affordable way, but only 6,000 people live here. We have billions of people in Asia. How do we cater for them? So these are very nice examples I admire a lot. Each of these architects, I sincerely admire their work. Michael Reynolds, who builds with waste, and so on. But unfortunately, these are not upscalable. We cannot change at scale our urban fabric unless we find ways of doing it. So we do need an alternative solution at scale. And we need it fast, because we are building a lot these days, so that our cities look much more attractive than what we are having now. This comes to reconciling two needs. The need of building fast and affordable, which is a tremendous need in the global south, we can't compromise on that, with the need of building sustainable and livable, because we've already seen that if you compromise on that need, then again, our cities are in big trouble. This is where we came up with the program, a third way of building Asian cities. So not the first mass way, not the second niche way, but a third sustainable, unique, and upscalable way, which we want to find how to tackle. We associated with 16 international experts, a number of whom you're going to meet today, who are based across the world. You can see their different locations, and with over 80 wonderful young professionals, some of them are here, who help us look at solutions, essentially in the view of meeting the goal of building unique, sustainable, and thriving cities across Asia. What essentially we try to do is to combine the efficiency of new technologies, because we need to upscale. So we want to look at topics such as modular construction. How can it also be tailored to the local context and not be uniform? How can we use the 3D printing with the local knowledge? Because without the local knowledge, we just have a one-size-fits-all approach, which doesn't work. And so that we reach a third way of doing this. Essentially, we are doing this by looking at three major streams, and you will see examples of each of them today. One is looking at the building scale. What kind of alternative materials, design techniques we can utilize, again, at scale to create livable, unique cities? What kind of alternative urban development models need to be in place to support this new approach? And very importantly, what kind of alternative policies, regulations, economic and financial mechanisms can actually help us upscale these two components? So just to give you a quick example before I hand over to my colleagues who are here today, how do we upscale? So for example, timber is something that we consider as very promising, as an alternative to mass construction materials such as cement, etc. So in here, can we shift at scale, not just have one occasional timber building here and there, but shift at scale to have timber cities? Countries like Canada and the US, they already have laid foundations. It's part of their building codes. You can build in the US, I believe, up to 12 stories high with timber only. In Asia, the paradigm is a bit different. So what we are looking is at the Asian context. The Asian context does not have so much hardwood. It's mainly softwood and bamboo. So the situation is different, but there are also advantages in the Asian region. For example, softwood and bamboo grow up to 4 times faster than hardwood. Bamboo can grow up to 90 centimeters a day, for example. So potential is huge if you look at it. In addition, we looked at this research of the World Resource Institute, which identifies the areas of restoration, in big need of restoration of ecosystems. And what we realize is that it very much overlaps with the tropical belt, where bamboo and softwood can grow best. So one of the ideas that we are exploring is how do we utilize some of these areas in need of ecosystem restoration to bring massive bamboo growing for construction in a sustainable way, which does not undermine other activities and ecosystems. So, of course, you can't build with bamboo high and upscaling if you just use it in a traditional way. But there are certain techniques like cross-laminated timber, for example, where you superpose layers of wood in such a way that they become very hard, and you use a special anti-fire glue to bring them together, which actually allows you to build high-rises. So it does already exist. You can see it across different countries. There are a few attempts that are happening now in Asia. Japan, Tokyo is building the biggest timber high-rise existing today, right now. So there are opportunities, and what we need is to see how we can implement them in Asia. Finally, an important point, there was a research done by a US company showing that a 5-story timber building can lock carbon of up to 600 cars which utilize fuel for a year, because timber actually captures carbon, and until you burn it, the carbon stays there. So not only you're carbon neutral, but you can also be carbon negative. So these are typically things we see because we believe there is upscaling possible in them. This is how you would live with timber. Looks pretty exciting compared to concrete boxes. And we want to make change together. And at this point, I would like to call on stage one of our experts. We'll start with looking at alternative building materials more in detail. So I believe our team of Mr. Sanjay Prakash, Mr. Tanmay Tathagat, and Dr. Samir Maithel are here online with us. If we can please have the help of our technical team to show them to us. So while we are setting it, great, this is their presentation. So Sanjay Prakash is the principal architect of Studio for Habitat Futures in New Delhi. A number of wonderful constructions across India and abroad as well, sustainable constructions. Dr. Samir Maithel is director of Greentech Technical Knowledge Solutions. And Mr. Tanmay Tathagat is executive director of Environmental Design Solutions. The team is based in New Delhi and has wonderful volunteers across the world. Sanjay, are you online? I believe you are speaking today. Olga, maybe if you could have Sanjay's video for a start before we shift to the presentation.
Yes, I am online.
Great. Hello, Sanjay. Hello from Doha.
Hi.
Hello.
So, can I be seen?
Yes, Olga, can you please show Sanjay to our Doha participants?
Anyway, let me speak. It's Tanmay is operating the systems. I can see myself as well. Okay. So, I'm sorry, my computer camera was not working, so I've shifted over to the phone. But Tanmay, if you can just start, yeah. So, well, this is a particularly interesting slide because it actually shows the complete set of authors of this report that I'm going to give you. So there are at the bottom the 9 volunteers who have worked on it, as well as on the top the 3 of us who guided the report. We happen to be basically based in Delhi, but we've been working on indicators for walls. Well, we started with walls, but our domain is to deal with all construction materials. We have chosen to go for construction materials which are, if you take it next, Tanmay. Okay, so these are the 4 themes for the material. That is, that we identified that we must get them to be environmentally correct, economic, so that they are scalable, physically robust, and socially relevant. Now, social relevance is normally ignored in a lot of work in this area, but it is important for us to scale for the material to have sufficient employability, provide livelihoods, and so on, in order to be satisfactory for the third way of building. Next, please. So we had various indicators that we listed down in an earlier stage of the research by April, March or so, March, April, May, June, which was the summer. And we listed down 9 environmental constraints, and you can see them on the screen. Some 6 economic constraints or indicators, some 8 physical indicators, and 4 or 3 social indicators. So clearly it's important, if you look at the social indicators again, that there be availability of craftsmen, or it be possible to learn the skill. Otherwise, this is not going to happen at scale. Next, please. So we did not intend to add or weigh these indicators, but to create a profile that would demonstrate suitability for the third way. Which is to say that, just like you have the features of somebody who's pretty or beautiful, then you say, okay, nice nose, eyes, and so on. You don't add these things up, no, because that's not how this works. You have to basically understand holistically the whole person and then decide whether it is suitable for the third way or not. So this is what we got. Next, please. So the 6 volunteers of change, that is in the second stage, they started virtually researching walls in 3 groups of 2 in August. These are the 3 groups: fired brick, compressed stabilized earth block, and reinforced concrete. So we did the most important constraint, in a sense, the embodied energy for walls for 1 cubic meter. We will be also working with all the other indicators, whatever there are, I think there are something like 30, 40 indicators. But we started with the easiest one in a sense, embodied energy for walls. So here it is per cubic meter. Next, please. So here you see the resources that go into making a fired brick wall, whether it's a brick or cement or sand or even water, because water is required for curing the mortar as well as wetting the bricks and so on. And you see the constraints at the bottom or the indicators at the bottom that, for example, again, to take an example from the social sector, production and labor on the bottom right is seasonal, making it available, unstable in social aspects. Next, please. These are some of the results, and I'm going to stop with this slide, but you see the importance of this. Now, these results are typically relevant to North India because that's the way that this research was done and most easily available. But you see how even stabilized CSEB, compressed stabilized earth blocks, um, are significantly lower in embodied energy per cubic meter than fired brick, 4 or 5 times lower. So clearly this is an area which deserves much more research because one has to iron out the problems associated with these issues rather than look at this not being scalable. Clearly, if this is scaled, then global warming of some kind could be addressed because the embodied energy and therefore the embodied carbon, which is closely related, is much lower than a fired brick wall. So the firing of the brick itself takes up a lot of embodied energy, and you can see it all compared on the right hand side with the third kind of wall which we started with, which a lot of civil engineers now favor, which is a monolithic RC aluminium shuttered wall. And that you can see is so many more times, even more than fired brick. And yet, of course, it is finding favor because when you don't really have to worry about the energy content of the building material, then you find that this is the way that you'd like to go. Now, this is clearly not scalable because of global warming. And CSEB is clearly not scalable because of a variety of concerns about the codes or the durability and so on. So it is in this area that I believe that our research should now focus on rather than simply discarding it as something not suitable for the third way. In fact, I would like to set a limit of something like 500 megajoules per cubic meter as the only method by which we can build walls. Later on, we'll be working on roofs also, but the only method by which we can build walls such that they are um, sustainable. And that requires to be done because you need to be able to scale such projects up. Otherwise, we will end up with no solutions from the construction sector. Thank you, Olga, and back to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sanjay. I understand to what extent your research is precious because I know that this data, we've been discussing it already for a few years, this data is not available. This comparison of how much carbon is emitted by different construction materials is very difficult to find. So this is an extremely valuable ongoing research you're doing. And yes, as you say, this is work in progress. But I believe that with these figures already we can start approaching policymakers and sensitizing them to the issue. Thanks a lot, Sanjay. I hope we'll see you again and your colleagues during the discussion. And now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Sanjeev Karpe. Sanjeev, are you here online? So Sanjeev will be covering the cost effectiveness and the scalability potential of bamboo. Sanjay, are you with us?
I'm here. Sanjeev is
Oh,
not.
I'm so sorry. It's Sanjeev. Yes, I'm mixing up, being, suddenly travels disruption after a long break. Sanjeev, are you with us? Are we missing Sanjeev? Julie, can you please report? Can you unmute yourself and let us know if Sanjeev is with us?
Olga, I don't see him online, so I
Yeah,
don't.
Okay. Okay, in this case, we'll move to the next presentation, and then we'll see if Sanjeev joins us. Julio, please come here. So Julio Carillo is an international senior planner and urban designer from the Urban Land Institute in Austin in the US. And Julio will be looking a little bit at the urban scale paradigm and addressing the issue of urban heat island effect in urban morphology. Julio, over to you.
Thank you, Olga. Thank you so much. You guys hear me well? It's good. Can we put my presentation full life over there so I can click it from here? Appreciate it. I know most of you, I already talked to you during the conference. There's some feedback. Hold on. So if I haven't talked to you, please, after the presentation, come and get me. This is a very exciting presentation that I have. That's not the presentation. Just go to the next one. Because I've been talking to some of you about the importance of urban heat islands and how we're building cities and how it's so easy to see that cities, sometimes we think with geospatial analysis, we don't think at the human scale. And this is a good example of how we can start looking at data in that way and humanize it, so bring it down to the human scale. I'm going to talk about how, this general conception, scientifically conception of we have a downtown area and the temperatures rise. And we know that for sure that's happening, right? But what do we have in those downtown areas? What do we have in those core cities? We have a mix of things, which is buildings, of course, but we also have parks, we have highways, we have surface parking lots, you name it. And what I wanted to really look into that is like, if it's really, really the buildings that we should blame for urban heat islands. And our team started looking at open source GIS data available anywhere. And we started asking the questions, is this open source really reliable? Is it accurate? Is it to the human scale? So we found really, really great data available, and with collaboration with some of the other collaborations from the UNICITI program with Olga, we found this link from the Center of the Earth Observation of Yale University, which gives us a planetary view of all the urban clusters in the planet, and tells us basically what the urban heat islands are for every city in the world. And so we, as a team, picked up 4 cities to analyze. We were 14 members, very passionate volunteers of change that decided to look at these 4 because we were really looking into other types of data, not only the urban heat island data. So we picked Ahmedabad, India, and you can start seeing those little patterns and pixels. Nashik, which is a smaller city in India, Singapore, and finally Jakarta. So I went from the cities that were more softer in terms of urban heat island contribution to the ones that are more. So Jakarta is the worst one. And you're going to see very interesting results in this analysis. And I was talking about the human scale, right? That this data, these big pixels, are probably 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers or something like that. And I wanted to just bring it down to a more humanized scale, and I decided to come up with this idea of a grid, a hexagon grid, which is amazing to kind of like see it once I'm walking through the streets of Doha. You see a lot of these patterns, and I've been taking pictures of every single hexagon grid that I find in the whole city. So it's been a repeated theme in my research and in my personal career. So, but back to the idea of this scalable thing, right? So the scale of each hexagons are a 5-minute walk between each edge of the hexagon. So from edge to edge is supposed to be a 5-minute walk. So it's very measurable in that sense, right? And I was able to or resample that data of big pixels into the smaller pixels, which are the hexagons, right? So that was the urban heat island challenge there. But then I started to say, what is the relation of urban heat island with the way we are building cities, the way we're placing buildings, the way we are giving the proportion to roads, very highways, big highway roads or surface parking lots and things like that. So I did also look at another set of data, which is land use diversity, because of the idea that the American model builds based on zoning and how that affects urban heat island. I also wanted to see if there is a correlation. And there is a strong correlation in US cities, but in Asian cities it's a little different. So the building compactness piece was the piece that really defined the morphology aspect of this analysis. This is at the end the result, and you have these 4 screenshots of 4 different cities, and you can tell by just looking at that the building footprints, how far apart they are or how close together they are, right? And all this data tells us a lot of insights. The bottom one, which is the red scale, is the temperature contribution to urban heat island for each city. But in theory, I mean, on the top bar graphics, you see the blue areas or the blue values that really are telling us what is the land consumption by building. And it really is a little bit. It's not that much in general. I started looking at the building compactness metrics just with this methodology. If you want to understand it a little more, you can go to that link on the bottom left. There is an article about how I came up with this idea of measuring the compactness of cities and buildings and the morphology of that. So, and sorry I'm boring with data and data points, but this is one of the most important pieces of the whole analysis that we came up with. On the right graphic, you see that vertical red line, which is the 0 temperature contribution, which means there is no difference between the urban cluster and the outside of the city. But to the right is the positive temperature differential. So if you're on the right side of that data, that means you're contributing to the urban heat island. And when I looked at those areas, really above and below that overall trend, you see that the land consumed by buildings on the top is only about 36.6%. So it's not even 50%. And on the bottom, of course, is the 9.6%, which means in this graph, the x-axis means the temperature, the vertical axis means the amount of building compactness, how compact are the buildings. So the lower right corner is mainly surface. It's mainly open space, right? It's not buildings. And so the big contribution, again, on this idea of the downtowns are made of not only buildings, but parks, highways, surface lots. The real breakthrough on this analysis was that the urban heat island main driver is the open space and how we're building the open space, how we're developing cities in the open space. We also looked at some ideas on looking at materials, right? But this data was very generic, and we were kind of like seeing overall non-patterns, but kind of like clustering to the left or to the right. We also look at land use diversity, where were the main clusters and which ones were not clustering. So the whole idea of this was to start looking at these cities entirely and started picking those areas that were highway dominant. And this is what you see as red dots. So I started picking the red dots for every city, Ahmedabad, Jakarta, Nashik. Those are the lower right red dots on all these graphics. And the statistical analysis said that every single group of clusters of red dots were either, for Singapore, 4 times more likely to have 2.3 degrees or higher contribution on urban heat island. 5.7 more likely in Ahmedabad, and so on. So it was very consistent analysis of the cities and how the urban heat island is really mainly driven by open space and the way of open space is constructed. So very wide highway roads, a lot of surface parking lots is what is is the most important piece on urban heat islands. So that's the breakthrough of the whole analysis of downtowns being contributors of the urban heat island. That's true that the buildings contribute, but the open space is the main driver of urban heat islands. Again, this is the conclusion, and this is, I think, the most important slide in the whole presentation, because I come with the idea of we need to, we found the problem and we need to find a solution. And I kind of put the solution in 3 little boxes. The box of materials, that we need to retrofit the existing materials that are happening in the open space. We need to retrofit the way our cities are walkable, because once we decide to define a compact city, we're making a more walkable city. And that reduces the proportion of open space that contributes to the urban heat island. And finally, the morphology, which is, again, compactness and how we give proportions to highways and roads. So very interesting analysis that we're starting to take on a second phase, just to correlate the vegetation stuff, or really urban networks with probably correlating with space syntax analysis and things like that. But that's it for me. Thank you, appreciate it.
Many thanks, Julio. In fact, very interesting conclusion, which is a bit unexpected intuitively. So these are precisely the things that we do want to put in place with solid data backing it up, so that we can approach policymakers and make the point that we actually do need a shift, and we know where we need this shift. So going forward, we have another presentation looking at the urban fabric and the use of the urban fabric. So the expert leading this work on repurposing buildings abandoned due to disruptions such as COVID-19 is Bassel Omara, based in Abu Dhabi. However, Bassel today could not join us, and the team leader of his research group, Smita Nair, is going to share the findings with us. Smita, are you with us online? Can you unmute yourself? Yes, hello, Smita. So this is over to you. Our technical team, please help us having the slides, and Smita.
Yes. Thank you, Olga, for the introduction. I would like to begin by understanding our team first, and we have been working under the guidance of Bassel Omara. We're a team of young professionals in the architectural and urban development fields, and have shared our expertise on this project since the beginning of this year. The goal of our research has been mainly to help cities adapt and respond better to disease outbreaks through city planning and architectural solutions. We intend to achieve this by providing strategies and preparing a framework that will help cities identify their existing building blocks and urban spaces that have been abandoned during the pandemic and repurpose them for better uses. We would also be integrating the 15-minute cities concept into our strategies and build guidelines that will not only help cities function during the pandemic, but also suit the needs of their post-pandemic city scenarios. We have been so far approaching a two-phase approach in our research, and currently we're in the first phase, which is more theoretical, we can say. So we begin by first identifying the trends and responses that have been prevalent over the past few decades, and we compiled responses that could be useful for our future planning and architectural models. We identified sectors and methods that we can repurpose abandoned buildings and spaces. Moving forward from that, we also saw a few more current new concepts that were emerging during the COVID pandemic, that is in city planning and architectural responses. So how did we go ahead? While mapping responses, we saw that all these pandemics that have been taking place over the last few centuries have not only increased in frequency but also intensity. The sectors that were affected and the responses that took place to mitigate these risks have more or less remained the same throughout. So what we saw is that form not only followed function, but also a fear of infection. But what happened during these previous pandemics is that they acted as catalysts to our current day city planning and architectural regulations that we see followed even today. So what can we take from today's new concepts that have been created during this pandemic and apply to a new way of living? So we looked towards 15-minute cities concepts and a community grid format that was adopted by Wuhan. And we found that these concepts were not only flexible, but also helped us to live and coexist during a pandemic while mitigating these risks and enabling us to only move forward and also help each other in this very community format and have neighborhoods function as sustainable self-contained units. Overlooking from all of these case studies that we found that the most predominant uses of abandoned spaces such as auditoriums, schools, and colleges were mostly targeted towards the healthcare sector, that is to help contain the pandemic and prepare for future responses that is ongoing. But the preparedness measures that we also saw is slowly emerging were pretty new and aren't very detailed as of the moment, and we are still following the methods that are currently going on since the past decades itself. So we thought, how can we repurpose abandoned spaces to not only help the healthcare sector, but also help the people who are living in these lockdown situations to actually go ahead with their lives and continue to live, exist, and work and educate themselves. So we found some unique solutions which could be helped to help for our cities to actually grow and continue to function in a healthy and sustainable way. Such as if we look at abandoned offices, can be turned into micro schools, which we find that, of course, our children nowadays have to sit at home and don't really have enough spaces. So office spaces and co-working spaces are more converted into these micro schools or learning pods. Then vacant storefronts, which had to shut down their businesses because they were not considered as essential, can actually turn into urban agriculture spaces and also combine with co-working spaces while they also generate business during the lockdown period. Also, the places such as hotels and factories and warehouses, which go into complete disuse during this period, can be converted into affordable housing or housing for the homeless or artist studios during this period, and can not only help address issues that are prevailing in our society before the pandemic, but also during it, and it also helps us increase our economic production during this time so that our world doesn't come to a standstill, but we actually find sustainable ways of moving forward and adapting to the current scenario of increasing outbreaks. So how do we move forward with this is that we found that we can create guidelines that would start shifting from our current scenarios of having single CBDs or limited public urban spaces or unequal access by slowly fragmenting and having interdependent components that not only integrate commercial activities, but also recreational activities have better access and include all our design necessities that would follow our COVID social distancing guidelines within our architectural and urban fabrics. So what we are looking to do at the moment is to have guidelines that can help us adapt during these situations and move towards a new normal. What we are proposing with our research is that we can use this COVID-19 as a certain catalyst for us to move forward in our planning and zoning regulations that we have been following over the last centuries. How do we reconfigure the way our residential units or offices are built and designed? Which areas would become more important for us to consciously design and make prepared for mitigating the sudden outbreaks and other disruptions that we may come across in the future? So this method that we are producing does have a certain impact that would only help local businesses boost, because we're looking at certain neighborhood models that would be more self-sustained. It would also increase livability and have better community integration within those units. So this is the certain way forward that we are looking through producing these guidelines of having not only move ahead in terms of our planning and zoning, but also architectural design that needs to be adapted with our current scenarios that we are encountering at the present and also in the future.
Many thanks, Smita. Many thanks. Excellent time management, exactly 7 minutes. We were discussing a 7 minutes time slot so that we can have a bit of time for the discussion. And Smita, you're just exact as per the second. Again, extremely important topic here. We saw that with COVID-19, a number of office spaces got abandoned, and we are not likely to utilize all of them again. In addition to this, a number of buildings just lose their purpose. And if we demolish all of them, this is again going to be a huge impact on the environment and on the livability of the city. So we need to ask these questions that this team is handling so that our cities can continue being dynamic. And so we have one more presentation from Sydney, from Australia, and it's almost night time. So Michael, I believe you're here with us. Thank you so much for staying up quite late. So Michael Linfield is a consultant to a number of international financial institutions, and his contribution to this team, as with all the other experts, is extremely valuable, because unless we find ways of financing new ways of building, we will not be able to do anything on the ground. So Michael, the floor is over to you.
Michael, could you please turn your microphone on?
Okay. There we go. I'm having a... Right. Good. Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much, Olga and UNICITI, for asking me to present. I'm here representing the work of our team. The team is headed by Dr. Andreas Lavalli, and our main researcher who has done a lot of the work on this particular presentation is Paris Ingara. We've had a number of other people working with us, and I think, we have to acknowledge that there's a very large amount of work yet to be done. What our team has been working on is looking at what we feel is critical costing and greenhouse gas emissions quantification for typical residential buildings and comparing traditional materials with bamboo materials. Just recapping quickly in terms of what the importance of cities in relationship to carbon emissions and greenhouse gases. Of course, the critical issue for us is to reduce the carbon footprint of our cities, and then the question becomes, how do you do that? There's a significant gap between how we conceptualize climate action plans for our cities and the actual implementation of them. And my background has been in finance, and the problem very often in these days is not that we don't have the money, it's that we don't have the right kind of projects. And it is very difficult to get the right kind of projects unless people are aware of the technical options that are open to them. And so our team has been trying to look at very practical mechanisms for attacking a particular area that Olga emphasized in her presentation, which is about the embodied energy. I work for the Green Climate Fund, as as well, looking at and developing their city strategy. Under the the Green Climate Fund strategy, there are a number of action fields that we want to focus on. One is decarbonising the energy sector, there's mobility and transport, there's urban form, urban resilience, materials flow, etc. But really a critical area for meeting the Paris targets is improving the energy efficiency of the building stock. And that's not just about, as Olga pointed out, about the use of energy in operation, but it's mainly an issue of, importantly an issue of how much energy is embodied in the consumption of materials that go into the building. And if we're going to meet our targets for the Paris Accord, the ICCC has estimated that basically we're going to have to reduce 32% of the material consumption impact by 2030. So there's a critical role for finding ways of reducing embedded energy. This is a different diagram which shows the same thing that Olga showed, but basically to point out the intervention points for reducing embedded energy. The extraction of raw materials, the processing, the transport, the construction, the use and maintenance, the demolition, and again, any recovery. All of these particular steps needs to have ways of reducing the impact. Now, when we looked at bamboo, we find that almost all of these steps, when we start to look at ways in which bamboo can be used, the greenhouse gas emissions impact is reduced in each one, but also importantly, the cost is reduced. The methodology that we used, we looked at two different types of typical buildings. One was a 3-story walk-up building, and the other one, which I'm not going to present today, was a 14-story relatively high-rise building. We wanted to compare two typical structures that are very, very much used across Asia, and we wanted to look at what impact the use, or the maximalist use, if you like, of bamboo in putting together these types of standard buildings would have, and it was the results have been very interesting. Now, when I say the results, these are very preliminary results so far. We're just coming up with our final results, and we need to fact check and to take into account some sort of particular aspects and assumptions that we've made. What we've done is we've looked at the costings for the slab, the columns, and the walls of a typical 3-story building. And again, we've worked out the embedded CO2 in those three elements, the slabs, the columns, and the walls. These are the kind of specifications, I won't go into them, but basically the summary is shown in this table. If we looked at the comparison between conventional and bamboo for this 3-story walk-up building, we find that using bamboo in the slabs has a very substantial cost saving, like 30%, with very little NCO2, because basically the bamboo replaces the reinforcing bars, and the reinforcing bars are a very small proportion of the actual volume of the slab. We kept the concrete as it was, as it has been produced in India. What we've done is we've taken costs for India and the emissions that are used or generated in producing these materials for India. So the comparisons are standardized across sort of for one country, basically. In terms of columns, however, there's a huge difference depending on what technology you use for the columns. Again, there's a 35% reduction in cost if you just replace the reinforcing bars in the columns with bamboo, but again, only a 2.3% reduction in embodied energy. But if you use a glue lamp column, a bamboo column, then there is a much bigger reduction of the CO2 impact, almost, yeah, it's almost negligible compared to what the impact of concrete is. The wall, and lastly, in terms of the walls, again, there's a 47% reduction in cost and a 93% reduction in embodied energy. So overall, when we look at the cost savings for a 3-story building, we find that conventional versus bamboo, we have a 41% reduction in cost, and if we use the glue lamp columns, we're looking at a 70% reduction in embodied energy. So again, these findings are preliminary. We still need to look at things, the impacts of things like how much of an additional cost will be required to fireproof the glue lamp columns, but we're pretty confident that very large savings are going to be made. And so the use of in summary, we can say that the use of local natural materials like sequestered carbon both cost less due to lower processing costs and lower transport costs, and as I said, the preliminary results suggest around about a 40% saving, and reduces climate impacts because of sequestration, lower processing costs and energy used in processing, transport and construction. So again, the preliminary results suggest savings of the order of 70% on the basic structure. So that's it, and that's our preliminary findings. We look forward to making more progress on this in the next little while. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Michael. Thank you very much. As I was saying, an extremely critical area, because when we approach policymakers, they want to know what tangible and financial benefits are going to result, including also international institutions, as you very rightly pointed out, for carbon reduction projects to pick up. These institutions request that there is a comparative assessment, and the work you're doing will help many interested cities and stakeholders to approach these institutions as well, I believe. So we've been quite well dealing with time. Thank you very much for this to all the speakers. And we do have now 15-20 minutes for an exchange, which is great. And so our colleague Olga, who is online in The Hague, would it be possible to have all the speakers featured on the screen so that we have a feel that they're with us?
Yeah. Yes, I think my colleagues in Doha may help me with that, but yes,
Okay. I meant the online speakers, if we can have a panel on the screen. And there seems to be a bit of a sound issue coming from online. I don't know where is the issue, but... Connection, because before it was fine, and then suddenly this came up. Oh, okay, okay. Okay, great. So here we are with the panelists. Dr. Samir also joined us, and I believe Tanmay is here as well from the team on behalf of which Sanjay Prakash has presented. Let us start with the physical in-person audience. Are there any comments, any questions to the speakers? Yes, I see. I will give you the mic. Please, actually, I think it would be nice if you just come here.
Yeah.
because
join us.
yes, then our
Good to
online
see you, Leo.
participants can see you as well, since the camera is set in this way.
Yes. Hello, everyone, and to our online audience. And my question is actually to Julio. Thank you for the urban heat island effect that you have discussed, and I'm really interested. That's what I told you yesterday. And one thing that I saw here in Doha is that they have an experimental phase about the cool pavement that reduces the heat that's coming from the sun and all that. So do you have any plans, or has there been studies that you will be conducting in the cities that you have mentioned about implementing any such kind of intervention in the open spaces to reduce the heat island effect?
Thank you, Leo. Great question, because that's actually what we're having the discussions with the team now for next phase analysis and studies, because we want to really focus on the material pieces and the albedo thing that is definitely correlated to that urban heat island. So great question, but to answer it, we don't have it yet. We haven't done it, but we're planning to do it.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Leo.
Mm-hmm. Any other comments from the audience? Yeah, it's the last day of the Congress. Maybe our online audience is a little more active. What I suggest, anyone who wants to speak, just unmute yourself. If you can have the video at the same time, that would be great, because our in-person participants can see you. Actually, maybe some experts have questions to each other, because I know that we've tried to collaborate a little bit between ourselves, but this is also an opportunity maybe to speak to each other here. So anyone who would want to pick questions up. Okay, maybe while you're preparing your questions, I have a number actually. So maybe I will start with the last presentation, and I'll have a question to Maithel. So Maithel, when I was mentioning that international financial institutions would be interested potentially in such projects, can you please elaborate a little more on how realistic this is, and how possibly we can better guide cities to start preparing such projects which would have a fair chance of being supported by institutions like the Green Climate Fund, the Global Environment Facility?
Yeah, thanks, Olga. I think it's important to understand the process by which very often, and these days in particular, the governments themselves in developing countries have a big say in this. The technical standards that are used are very important. So in a country that shall remain nameless, and project that I was involved in, while the expatriate sort of staff who were designing very nice green solutions actually used those materials because they were precluded from doing so by the government regulations. And the international organization needs to take a step back forward and backwards into that.
For our audience in person, sorry that apparently I think we have some Wi-Fi issues. So the online audience seems to be fine, but we are struggling a bit. Hopefully our technical team will help.
It's either that or Michael is really a robot. It sounds like a robot here. So, but I'm sure the online. Okay. Yeah, it's very hard to understand a little bit of what's happening.
Actually, it's pretty impressive for our one of the first hybrid sessions. It looks wonderful. You're here all on big screen. So for the start of this new kind of an approach to events, I think it works pretty well. But yes, we obviously, as pioneers, face some challenges. I think Sanjay wants to intervene. Sanjay, please.
Yeah. I wanted to ask Maithel, and exactly this is what prevents we so require codes as well. We require codes and we require engineers to be able to use the materials to be able to lower their potency. And so there's a lot of work to be able to get there. We are still quite far from the Paris targets, and I don't think we are at warp speed.
Can you now hear me better or
Yes.
other? No, I think don't go and online.
Well, yeah, definitely that was difficult to understand if it was a different language or we're talking to robots. It's the magic of technology. We gotta embrace it. But hopefully we're post-COVID, so we're starting to meet more in person.
But maybe while this is getting fixed, Julio, if I can take the advantage of a bit of time that we have now, to ask you a question. So you've examined a number of Asian cities here, Ahmedabad and Jakarta. So did you also look into what are the practical implications of such conclusions? So for example, your really interesting breakthrough conclusion was that it was open spaces more than buildings maybe, or comparatively, which were contributing to the heat island effect. So did you analyze a bit further already what exactly could be done in these cities specifically? Because there is also a layout, as we discussed in the beginning of this session, that once you set up a certain infrastructure, it actually is quite costly to remove it. So did you have any considerations on what possibly can be done?
So yeah, and absolutely. That was the main idea on the last slide of my presentation, where I want to focus on 3 boxes of solutions, which is the box. The first one was the box of retrofitting the materials. So, and I'm not going to retrofit a road. I'm just, if it's a highway that is depressed, you can really cover it and create place-making opportunities, creating parks on top of highways and things like that that really take back that detrimental concrete surface and making it a more sustainable type of approach and less contributing to the urban heat island. That was the first box. So that's kind of like a box of solution, retrofitting and figuring out a framework, a system for cities that can start piloting programs for retrofitting highways. And could be retrofitting surface parking lots as well. So that's the first box idea. The second one is more like related to the zoning, policies and incentives of supporting that 15-minute city concept, which is you need to have within a 15-minute walk. A good diversity of things, a good amount of buildings. You can walk in shadows and in materials or surfaces that are not heating up and making uncomfortable walks. That was the second box that I kind of came up with solutions. And the last one was more like into the design of cities in terms of morphology. How do you really want the cities to be? If you want them to sprawl too much, don't make buildings too far apart between them. So really putting the buildings together and making compact cities, make them more walkable, but also reduces that proportion of open space that can be detrimental to the urban heat island. So let's not blame the buildings. That is the urban heat island main contributor, is the open space that is the main contributor to the urban heat island.
Thank you very much. In fact, I remember one data set that across Asia, in cities, 30% of the surface is occupied by roads, which means there is huge potential actually to do these interventions. I also remember in one of the events, the former mayor of Barcelona told us that few years ago, they removed 37 over 39 flyovers, which in Asia now are built quite, quite fast, but actually other cities who have gone through it now are removing them. So there are definitely trends in the direction which, which you pointed.
And one thing I want to add is that the bottom line to this is like we still need roads, right? It's just the proportion of them is what is important. So I want to focus, my analysis focus on highway dominant spaces. But you know, I didn't look at surface parking lots, but I would say if I really look at surface parking lots, same conclusions are going to be found. Yeah, proportionality of that open space and materiality of that open space is what we need to look at.
And by the way, that brings us to another very interesting thought. When we talk about electric cars, we think that we are addressing everything by just shifting, you know, the fuel mode. But actually, many issues are going to remain, such as, for example, the same road staying. So, for me, the conclusion that I drive from this discussion is that cities need to really look more holistically at mobility, how to improve mobility in a way that we don't depend on cars that massively.
And that could be another solution or strategy to retrofit this open space, right? Incorporating that multimodal type of transit into what is now solely automobile oriented. So absolutely, that's one of the other things we can do.
Just checking with our technical team, how are we doing with online speakers? And what does this mean? I don't know, Marit. Okay. Yes, it would be nice maybe for us to all reconnect together to say thank you to everyone, but I don't know if technically we are capable of doing it. If so, could we please have the online panelists back on the screen?
I want to make a special mention while the guys are putting the screen together. My team was amazing on this research. They were passionate guys. They were really trying to find all this difficult to find geospatial data. And that's one of the biggest challenges that we're facing in Asian cities. You know, that the data is not really accessible. So finding open source data was so complicated. The main challenge that we need to also talk to the cities about solving this is that we can get to these results and to these conclusions once we find the data, once we have it as a geospatial access. And you know, so that's something that we need to figure out as a region, so we can look at and compare between cities in these terms of geospatial analysis.
Absolutely. Data is something that we working with Asian cities constantly face as an issue. But I want to emphasize on the team part, Julio, that you mentioned. Because imagine that actually by now altogether we have over 100 people, because we have a few more teams outside of the Third Way program. Young people who join us, it is all pro bono work, including for ourselves and for them. And they are passionate to the extent that they really give a significant amount of time every week, so that together we can come to these conclusions, which to me brings a lot of hope, because it shows that young professionals do want to change things. And I'm really hopeful and positive that we will eventually achieve this, although the road may not be easy, but it leads in the right direction.
Yeah, and I just want to acknowledge again Nisarg, Valeria, Nitish, and Sneh. They were really instrumental in making our team and analysis successful. So I hope they are online and they can hear us. So thank you very much, guys.
So should we wrap this up, or are we still waiting for our online participants? Marit, if you can please tell me what is the situation? Okay, so I guess we'll say goodbye to our online participants separately. Thank you very much for being with us. Thank you for being patient. I believe you realize that we are entering a new era of events. So we are really the pioneers and doing these first steps. And I'm sure in the near future it will be much smoother. But it was really great to have you over. It was great to have separate discussions with many of you whom I see here. Thank you for your interest, support, and let's make change together.
I second it. It's been great to getting to know you here, guys, in this conference is what makes these things so different, right? Connecting with people like you. So thank you so much. Appreciate it.
And thanks a lot, Julio, for supporting the smooth flow of this event, and of course the great presentation.
Thank you. Happy to do it all the time. Thank you.